It was from Resolve. With that second case now connected, the investigation moved faster, because now it wasn't just my word against hers. It was a documented pattern across multiple victims. Detective Alvarez explained the plan to me carefully. They needed one more piece, a live current transaction, something recent enough to anchor the case firmly in an active time frame, not just historical records. And that's when I found out Nicole was 3 weeks away from doing it again. My mother, in a moment of guilt-ridden weakness, let it slip during one of our rare phone calls that Nicole had asked her to co-sign a new joint account, this time attached to our late grandmother's remaining property trust, a small rental house in Ohio that Nicole had apparently been quietly pressuring our mother to liquidate. I remember the phone call with my mother when she let this slip, because I had to sit completely still and keep my voice light and unbothered. The hardest acting performance of my entire life. She just wants to modernize the property, honey, put it in a trust account that's easier to manage, my mother said, clearly reciting words that weren't originally hers. That makes sense, I said, forcing something close to warmth into my voice. Grandma's house probably does need updating on the paperwork side. Inside, I was screaming. Outside, I sounded like a daughter simply catching up with her mother. The second I hung up, I called Daniel, who was still at work, and I could barely get the sentence out fast enough. She's doing it again. The Ohio property. Mom just told me. Daniel went quiet for a second, and then said the words that stuck with me through the entire rest of this ordeal. Good. Let her. This is exactly the live transaction we needed. That was the final piece. If Nicole successfully forged her way into that trust account, the fraud would nearly double. Detective Alvarez and the Financial Crimes Unit set up what they called a monitored transaction trap, watching the trust account activity in real time, waiting for Nicole to make her move, which, being exactly as arrogant as she'd always been, she did within 11 days. She forged my mother's signature this time too, not just mine, on a trust distribution form, transferring $60,000 from the property trust into a new account under her own name. The moment that transfer cleared, it triggered the flag the investigators had been waiting for. And that's when the wedding happened. Yes, in the middle of all this, my actual wedding day arrived. I almost postponed it. Daniel told me not to. "Don't let her steal this too," he said. "We're getting married, and she's going to get exactly what's coming to her, right on schedule." The wedding was small, intimate, 70 guests, held at a vineyard outside of town. I invited my mother. I invited Nicole. Not because I forgave them, because Detective Alvarez asked me to, quietly, as part of the timing of the plan, since the arrest warrant, based on the trust fraud and the original savings fraud combined, was being finalized that exact week, and they needed Nicole in a predictable public location for a controlled arrest, rather than risking her fleeing or destroying evidence if she got spooked beforehand. I know how that sounds. Using my own wedding as part of a law enforcement operation. But honestly, by that point, some twisted part of me thought it was almost poetic. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 5 a.m., wide awake, staring at the ceiling of the hotel suite, my heart pounding for two completely different reasons at once. Daniel found me in the bathroom, sitting on the edge of the tub, still in my robe, not crying, just breathing slowly, trying to hold two versions of that day in my hands at the same time, the bride and the woman who had spent months quietly building a case against her own sister. "You don't have to do this today if it's too much," he said. "We can push the timeline." "No," I said. "I want her to see me happy first. I want that to be the last thing she remembers before everything changes." He nodded, kissed my forehead, and didn't say another word about it for the rest of the morning. By the time I walked down the aisle, I had genuinely, fully let myself feel joy. Real joy. The kind that doesn't ask permission from your circumstances. For a few hours, I wasn't a fraud victim. I was just a bride. Nicole showed up in a dress that, based on the receipt Detective Alvarez later confirmed, cost $1,800, paid for with my grandmother's trust money. She hugged me at the reception, smiling, completely unaware, and said, "I'm so happy for you, sis. Guess the money thing worked out fine after all, right?" I smiled back. "Yeah," I said. "It's about to work out." She had no idea what those words meant. About 40 minutes into the reception, right after the toasts, two plainclothes officers approached Nicole near the dessert table. I watched from across the room, Daniel's hand steady on my back. The band had just started playing something slow. Guests were laughing near the bar, and Nicole was mid-bite of chocolate cake when the two officers approached. Calm, unhurried, badges out but not raised, the way trained professionals handle a public arrest without turning it into a spectacle they don't need. I watched the exact moment her face changed, the confusion, then the panic, then the horror as she realized this wasn't a joke. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was real. Nicole Monroe, you're under arrest for forgery and fraud related to the theft of funds from Rachel Monroe Reyes and the Monroe Family Trust. The room went dead silent. My mother dropped her champagne glass, the sound of it shattering against the floor somehow louder than anything else in that moment. "Rachel!" Nicole screamed. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, walking toward her, calm, steady, the calmest I'd felt in months. "You did this, Nicole. Every transfer, every forged signature. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences." She tried explaining right there, in front of 70 guests, that it was a misunderstanding, that we were working it out privately. But Detective Alvarez, who had quietly attended as a guest that Nicole never noticed, stepped forward and calmly stated that forensic handwriting analysis, banking records, and a second victim's testimony made this considerably more than a family disagreement. My mother tried to intervene, tried to claim responsibility, tried to say it was all her fault, all a gift, anything to protect Nicole one last time. She grabbed my arm, hard, her nails digging into my wrist, whispering through gritted teeth so the guests wouldn't hear. "Fix this. Right now. You can fix this." I looked at her, calm, and said quietly, "I'm not the one who broke it, Nicole." An officer gently stepped between us, and that's when my mother pushed through the crowd, mascara already streaking, grabbing at the officer's arm. But it was too late for that story to hold up. The trust document had her forged signature too, and once investigators explained that claiming false authorization after the fact to protect a family member from fraud charges could itself carry legal consequences, my mother went quiet very quickly. Nicole was led out of my wedding reception in handcuffs, mascara running, screaming that I had ruined her life, while every guest, every single one, watched in stunned silence. I want to be honest with you. I didn't feel joy in that exact moment. I felt something heavier, sadder, like watching a slow-motion collapse of someone I used to genuinely love as a kid, back before all the entitlement and excuses buried whoever she used to be. But I also felt, for the first time in almost a year, like I could finally breathe. The case moved through the courts over the following 10 months. Nicole was charged with 2 counts of forgery, 1 count of financial fraud exceeding $100,000, and an additional charge related to the elderly neighbor's case once that victim, encouraged by the visibility of my case, finally came forward fully. She avoided significant prison time through a plea deal, largely because it was a first formal conviction on paper, but she was sentenced to 5 years probation, mandatory restitution of the full amount stolen across all 3 victims, and a permanent fraud record that will follow her on background checks for the rest of her life. Try opening a business, applying for most decent jobs, or even renting a nice apartment with a fraud conviction attached to your name. Her consulting business collapsed within weeks, once local news, yes, it actually made local news, covered the story under a headline about family financial exploitation. I attended 2 of the court hearings, sitting quietly in the back, not to gloat, but because I needed to see the process through with my own eyes, needed to watch the system actually work for once instead of just hearing about it secondhand. At the sentencing hearing, Nicole's lawyer tried painting her as a young woman who made poor decisions under financial pressure, someone who deserved leniency and a second chance. The prosecutor calmly laid out the timeline instead: 8 months of calculated withdrawals, a forged joint account form, a second victim in Margaret Chen, and a third attempted fraud on a family trust discovered mid-transaction. "This is not a pattern of desperation," the prosecutor said. "This is a pattern of exploitation." I watched Nicole's shoulders drop when the judge read that same phrase back during sentencing. A pattern of exploitation. 4 words that seemed to finally strip away every excuse she'd hidden behind her entire life. The car got repossessed 4 months later. The $1,800 dress, ironically, was the one thing she got to keep. A strange little souvenir of the last day her old life existed. As for my mother, our relationship changed permanently. She wasn't charged since the investigators ultimately determined her involvement, while ethically troubling, didn't meet the threshold for criminal intent. More negligence and misplaced loyalty than active conspiracy. But something between us broke that day at the vineyard, and honestly, it's still broken. We talk occasionally now, careful, distant conversations, the kind you have with someone you love but no longer fully trust. She apologized eventually, months later, crying on my porch, saying she thought she was keeping the peace, protecting her younger daughter the way she always had. I told her something that day I still stand behind completely. Protecting Nicole from consequences isn't love, Mom. It's what turned her into someone who thought she could steal from her own sister and call it fair. I got every dollar back, every single one, through the court-ordered restitution plan. Slow monthly payments garnished directly from Nicole's wages once she found work again. A plan that will run for years. But it runs. Some of my extended family didn't speak to me for months after the wedding, convinced I had humiliated the family by letting an arrest happen in public, as if the humiliation started with the handcuffs and not with the forged signature that put them there in the first place. I lost a few relationships in the fallout, aunts, cousins, people who chose comfort over truth, and honestly, I've made peace with that. Some people will always prefer a quiet lie over a loud truth, and I've stopped being willing to shrink myself to protect that preference. The elderly neighbor, once her case was folded into the investigation, sent me a handwritten card a few months later, thanking me for speaking up, saying she'd been too embarrassed to push the issue further on her own. That letter meant more to me than almost anything else that came out of this entire ordeal. It reminded me that staying quiet doesn't just cost the person staying quiet. It costs everyone else Nicole would have gone on to hurt if nobody had ever stopped her. Daniel and I bought our first house 8 months after the wedding. A small place with a garden I never thought I'd have the stability to plant, using money that finally, actually, belonged to me. Grandma's rental property trust was restructured too, with a court-appointed independent trustee now managing what's left, specifically to prevent this from ever happening again to anyone else in the family. Daniel proposed adding one more safeguard once everything settled, something small but symbolic, a shared document we keep updated every year listing our accounts, our beneficiaries, and our passwords in a secure, encrypted file only the two of us can access. Not because I think it could happen again the same way, but because I never want to feel that specific kind of blindsided helplessness for the rest of my life. The feeling of learning your own name was used against you by someone who was supposed to love you. Margaret Chen, the elderly neighbor, actually came to visit me a few months after the sentencing, bringing a small tin of homemade cookies, the same kind she used to leave on porches for the neighborhood kids. We sat on my new porch for almost 2 hours, two strangers connected by the same person's greed, and somehow it didn't feel heavy. It felt like closure. She told me she'd finally opened a proper retirement consultation with an independent licensed advisor, someone with no connection to our family whatsoever. And for the first time in years, she said she felt like she understood exactly where her money was and who could touch it. That conversation stayed with me longer than almost anything from the courtroom. Looking back, I think about that dinner table moment constantly, the moment Nicole asked me if I liked her new car while sitting 3 feet from a federal agent who could see exactly what kind of person she really was underneath the smile. She spent 8 months building an entire lifestyle on my trust and my silence. It took me less than half that time to take it all back, quietly, legally, without ever raising my voice once. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. Justice doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like staying calm while someone underestimates you completely, letting them talk, letting them spend, letting them get comfortable, right up until the exact moment the paperwork catches up to the lies. Nicole thought family loyalty meant I would always look away. She learned in front of 70 wedding guests and 2 federal investigators that loyalty isn't the same thing as being blind. If this story hit you somewhere deep, hit that subscribe button, because there are so many more stories just like this one waiting for you. Stories about quiet people who got pushed too far, and the calculated, satisfying karma that eventually caught up to the people who never saw it coming. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story. My aunt texted me, actual words, "Nicole's struggling, Rachel. Maybe let this one go for peace. Let it go." $141,000, and I was supposed to let it go for peace. There was a night, about 3 weeks after I found out, where I sat on my bathroom floor at 2 a.m, scrolling through old photos on my phone, trying to find the exact moment things had started going wrong between Nicole and me. I couldn't find it. There wasn't one moment. It was hundreds of small moments, stacked quietly on top of each other for years, until they built into something enormous enough to swallow my entire savings account without her even blinking. I thought about calling my dad, but he passed when I was 22, and some nights, that absence hits harder than others. He used to be the one person who never let Nicole get away with things, and I remember thinking, almost bitterly, that maybe this never would have happened if he'd still been around to see it. I stopped going to family events. I stopped answering my mother's calls. I felt completely, utterly alone. The kind of alone where you start questioning your own memory, wondering if maybe you really were being dramatic. Maybe you really were the difficult one, because that's what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you decide instead to protect each other against you. I cried in my car in a grocery store parking lot because I couldn't afford the brand of coffee I used to buy without thinking twice. It sounds small. It wasn't small. It was the weight of everything, all at once, crashing down over a $5 bag of coffee. That was rock bottom, sitting in a Honda Civic, crying over coffee, because my own sister decided my future was hers to spend. But rock bottom is also where things started to change, because that same week, Daniel sat me down and told me something I never expected. "Rachel, there's something about my job I haven't told you the full extent of." I remember blinking at him confused, because I knew Daniel worked in finance compliance, something vague he never elaborated on much, and honestly, in 3 years of dating, I never pushed. "I'm not just compliance," he said. "I'm a federal agent, Financial Crimes Division. I investigate exactly this kind of thing, Rachel. Fraud, forged signatures, elder and family financial exploitation." I sat there completely silent for a moment, processing. "You're telling me this now?" "I couldn't tell you certain details of active cases before, it's part of the job. But this isn't a case, Rachel. This is you. This is us. And what your sister did isn't a family dispute. It's bank fraud, it's forgery, federal crimes depending on how the transfers were structured." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt the tiniest, coldest spark of hope. "I want this done right," Daniel said. "Legally, airtight, not emotional, not a screaming match at your mom's kitchen table. I want her caught with paperwork she can't talk her way out of." That was the moment the story shifted from a woman being victimized to a woman quietly building a trap. Daniel couldn't personally investigate his own future sister-in-law. That would be a massive conflict of interest, and he knew it immediately. But he knew exactly who could and exactly what evidence they'd need. Over the next month, while Nicole posted vacation photos funded by my savings and my mother pretended nothing had happened, Daniel and I quietly built our case, piece by piece. Step 1. We requested the full forensic records from the bank, every transfer, every login IP address, every notary signature log. Step 2. We hired a private handwriting analyst, an actual forensic document examiner, who compared the joint account form signature against 12 verified samples of my real signature from tax documents, my lease, and my passport renewal. The conclusion was clear. Forged, with roughly 94% confidence, the analyst said, and he'd testify to that in court if needed. Step 3. Daniel connected me with a financial crimes detective in the local police department, a woman named Detective Patricia Alvarez, who specialized in family fraud cases, elder exploitation, forged POAs, the exact pattern Nicole had used. Step 4. We pulled Nicole's public spending trail, the new car, financed partially but with a suspiciously large cash down payment. The boutique consulting business she'd started that had 0 actual clients but plenty of Instagram posts, the credit card payoffs. Every dollar had a paper trail, and paper trails don't lie, even when people do. Detective Alvarez walked me through exactly how these cases usually fall apart, so I'd understand why patience mattered more than anger. "Most family fraud cases collapse," she told me, sitting across from me in a small interview room that smelled like burnt coffee, because the victim goes emotional too early. They confront, the family closes ranks, evidence gets deleted, stories get rehearsed. We wait. We document. We let them think they've won. That sentence became something I repeated to myself constantly over the following weeks, especially every time Nicole posted another vacation photo, another new outfit, another caption about manifesting abundance. While I sat there knowing exactly where that abundance came from, I kept a private folder on my laptop, encrypted, labeled with a name that meant nothing to anyone but me, and every single piece of evidence went into it the moment I received it. Bank statements, screenshots, the forensic handwriting report, even a voicemail from my mother left by accident, where she could be heard telling someone else on speakerphone that she signed some paperwork to help Nicole out. Don't tell Rachel yet. That voicemail alone nearly broke me when I first heard it. But I saved it. Because by that point, I understood something important. My pain wasn't useful to the case. My evidence was. I want to pause here and tell you something important. This entire time, I said nothing to my family. Not one word. I went quiet, and I let them believe I had simply given up, that I was too tired to fight, too broken to push further. Nicole actually texted me during this time, and I remember this message word for word. Glad you're finally being mature about this. Family sticks together. I didn't respond. I screenshotted it and sent it straight to Detective Alvarez, because a message like that, arrogant, dismissive, completely unbothered, was exactly the kind of thing that would matter later, showing a clear pattern of intent rather than a misunderstanding. 6 weeks into the investigation, Detective Alvarez called me with an update that made my stomach drop and lift at the same time. Rachel, this isn't isolated. We pulled records on 2 other accounts linked to your sister's name. There's a similar pattern with an elderly neighbor, a smaller amount, about $8,000, reported 18 months ago but never fully pursued due to lack of evidence. I sat there stunned. It wasn't just me. Nicole had done this before, quietly, to someone even more vulnerable, an elderly widow 2 doors down from my mother's house. Someone who trusted her because she used to walk her dog for extra cash as a teenager. That detail changed something in me. This wasn't a one-time desperate mistake. This was a pattern, a calculated, repeated behavior, dressed up as family helping family, so no one would look too closely. Detective Alvarez pulled up the older case file on her laptop and turned the screen toward me, and I remember the sound the room made, which was no sound at all, just silence, while I read through it. The neighbor's name was Margaret Chen, 73 years old, widowed for 6 years. The kind of woman who still left cookies on the porch for kids in the neighborhood, even though her own grandkids lived 3 states away. According to the file, Nicole had offered to help Margaret manage her online banking after Margaret mentioned struggling with a new mobile app the bank had rolled out. Within 4 months, $8,000 had moved out of Margaret's account in small, unremarkable withdrawals. Margaret noticed eventually, confronted Nicole gently, the way trusting older people often do, and Nicole cried, apologized, promised to pay it back in installments, and paid back exactly $600 before the promises quietly stopped. Margaret, embarrassed and unwilling to cause a scene in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, never formally pursued it beyond one hesitant conversation with a patrol officer who logged it and moved on. No forensic follow-up, no real investigation, just a name in a database gathering dust. Reading that file, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sick. Because it meant this cruelty wasn't born the moment she looked at my bank balance. It had a track record. It had a rhythm she'd already tested and gotten away with once before. And somewhere inside me, a small, quiet voice said, "This has to stop with me, because if it doesn't, there will be a Margaret again, and a Rachel again, over and over, for as long as nobody holds her accountable." That night, I didn't sleep much, but for the first time since discovering the fraud, the sleeplessness wasn't from grief. My sister stole my entire $140,000 wedding fund, then sat across from me smiling as she showed off her brand new car. She thought she had committed the perfect crime. She never expected the quiet stranger beside me to pull out a federal badge. If you love watching greedy people fall from their own trap, hit subscribe right now because this one gets brutal. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 31 years old. And 2 years ago, I found out my own sister had been stealing from me since I was 26. Let me take you back to the exact moment I found out. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my banking days. I liked routine. I liked control. I opened my banking app on my lunch break, sitting in my car outside the marketing firm where I worked. The balance loaded. $0.12. I stared at it. I refreshed it. Still $0.12. My hands actually started shaking. This wasn't a checking account. This was my savings. The one my grandmother left me when she passed. The one I had been feeding for 5 years. Every bonus, every tax return, every overtime check. $141,000 gone in what looked like 6 separate transfers over 8 months. I called the bank immediately. The woman on the phone, very calm, very rehearsed, told me the transfers were authorized. Authorized by who? I said. By Nicole Monroe, she said. Listed as joint account holder since March of last year. I remember laughing. An actual laugh, sharp and confused, like my body didn't know how else to respond. I never added a joint holder, I said. There's a signed form on file, ma'am. That's when the floor dropped out from under me. Because I knew exactly who Nicole Monroe was. My younger sister. The one who still lived rent-free in our mother's basement at 28. The one who called me boring for having a savings account in the first place. I drove straight to my mother's house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't think. I just drove. When I walked in, Nicole was in the kitchen, laughing on the phone, wearing a jacket I'd never seen before, the tag still hanging off the sleeve. "Where's my money, Nicole?" I said, not even bothering with hello. She turned around slow, like she'd been expecting this exact moment and had already written her lines. "What money?" $141,000, Nicole. From my savings. Don't. She glanced at our mother, who suddenly became very interested in the dishes in the sink. "I needed it more than you did," Nicole said, flat, like she was explaining why she took the last slice of pizza. "You needed it more than me? You're getting married. You have Daniel. You have his salary. I have nothing." I stood there, stunned, actually stunned, because the audacity in her voice wasn't even hidden. It wasn't guilt. It was entitlement. "That money was for my wedding, Nicole, for our future house. Grandma left that to me." "Grandma would want family to help family," she said, crossing her arms. Our mother finally spoke, quiet, weak. "Rachel, honey, don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." My life savings had vanished, and I was the one being asked not to make a scene. That was the moment something inside me went cold and very, very quiet. Not defeated, calculating. I want to give you a little more of the picture before I keep going, because a story like this doesn't make sense unless you understand the years underneath it, the quiet years, the years nobody was filming. Now let me back up, because you need to understand who Nicole really is and how deep this betrayal actually went. Growing up, Nicole was the golden child, not because she earned it, because our mother decided early on that Nicole was sensitive and I was strong, which really just meant Nicole got excuses and I got expectations. I paid my own way through community college. Nicole dropped out twice and Mom paid both times. I saved every dollar I made from 18 years old onward. Nicole spent every dollar she made from 18 years old onward, and then some, usually mine. I remember being 17, working at a diner on weekends, saving up for a used car, and coming home to find $40 missing from the envelope I kept taped under my mattress. I asked Nicole about it. She shrugged and said, "I needed gas money. You'll make more. You always do." My mother's response when I brought it to her was almost identical to what she said years later at that kitchen table. "Don't make this a whole thing, Rachel. She's your sister." That phrase followed me my entire childhood, a soft, guilt-wrapped leash disguised as family values. She's your sister, as if that single fact erased every boundary I was allowed to have. By the time I was in college, I had learned to hide things, not because I was secretive by nature, but because hiding was the only form of protection available to me in that house. I hid cash in different spots. I used a separate bank at a different branch than the rest of the family, specifically so no one could check the balance for me as a favor, which had happened more than once with my first account as a teenager. Looking back now, I think some quiet part of me always knew this day might come. I just never expected it to be this large, this calculated, or this cold. There had always been small things. A missing 20 from my wallet here. A borrowed credit card there, never repaid. But I never imagined she'd go this far. I never imagined she'd forge my signature on a joint account form, because that's what she did. She forged it. I found that out 2 days later when the bank finally sent me a copy of the paperwork. My signature, except it wasn't mine. Close, but the R was wrong. I don't loop my R like that. I've signed my name thousands of times in my life, and I know exactly how it looks. This wasn't sloppy theft. This was planned. 8 months of slow, careful withdrawals, small enough at first not to trigger alerts, timed around my paycheck deposits so the balance never looked obviously wrong to a woman who trusted her own sister enough to never check that closely. I confronted her again that weekend, calmer this time, recording the conversation on my phone, something I'd learned to do the hard way growing up in that house. "I want the money back, Nicole, all of it, or I go to the police." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Go ahead. Mom will tell them it was a gift. Won't you, Mom?" And here is where the story takes its first real turn, the one that changed everything. Because my mother didn't deny it. She nodded. "It probably was meant as a gift, Rachel. Grandma would have wanted us to share." That's when I understood the second betrayal. It wasn't just Nicole. My mother had known. She'd helped set up the meeting with the bank notary. She'd told the notary she was there as a witness for a family financial arrangement. 2 people I trusted my entire life had planned this together, quietly, patiently, while I worked overtime shifts thinking I was building a future. I left that house and sat in my car for almost 40 minutes before I could drive. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat there, replaying every conversation from the last 8 months. Every time Nicole mentioned a new purse, a new car down payment, a loan from a friend she never named. It had all been my money, my grandmother's money. And I had been too trusting, too busy, too in love with my own upcoming wedding to notice. When I finally got home, Daniel was waiting. Daniel Reyes, my fiancé. Quiet, steady, the kind of man who listens more than he talks, which used to drive me a little crazy until I realized how rare that actually is. I told him everything, sitting on our kitchen floor because I didn't even have the energy to make it to the couch. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He just got very, very still, the way he does when something serious is happening at work. "Rachel," he said, "I need you to tell me everything again, slowly, and I need you to show me every document you have." I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought he was just being supportive, being thorough, being Daniel. I had no idea what was about to unfold. Now let's talk about the weeks that followed, because this is where I hit the lowest point of my life. The wedding was in 7 weeks. I had no savings for the venue deposit balance, no savings for the honeymoon we'd planned, nothing. I had to call my future mother-in-law and admit, humiliated, that I couldn't cover my half of the costs anymore. I remember sitting in that call, forcing my voice to stay steady, feeling like the ground under my entire identity had cracked open. I had always been the responsible one, the one who didn't need bailing out. And now I was the one who got robbed by her own family, and somehow in the family group chat, I became the villain for causing drama.